Welcome to Career Bootcamp 2023. This afternoon session is titled, When Do You Need a Selection Process? If you were at our session earlier on hiring through social media, I'm sure that this question is very pressing for you. Please note that this session will be offered in English and French simultaneously. To view the French session, please return to the agenda and click on Quand avez-vous besoin d'un processus de sélection? I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm here on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The Mi'kmaq have lived here since time immemorial, and I encourage all of you to acknowledge the land on which you are as well. Career Bootcamp is the largest conference in the GC, and it is the only conference focused on your career journey. As we move through today's session, we ask that you please use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions in the language of your choice. You can vote for questions that you like by clicking on the thumbs up button. As with all of our Federal Youth Network sessions, this session will be recorded, so you can go back and check out the recordings and the insights at a later date. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator and panelists. Have a great session.
Thank you so much, Jen. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia. I will be the moderator for our session today. I am fortunate to be speaking with you while on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I am currently a policy analyst at Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. I previously worked at Environment and Climate Change Canada through the Federal Student Work Experience Program, and I received my current position through a bridging process after working a casual contract. So I'm very excited to learn alongside all of you from our experienced panelists today, who can provide both a personal and technical perspective on the official selection process for positions across the government. The objectives for this session are to identify when an official process is needed to achieve certain career goals, identify important details of processes, including intent, expiry, use by other departments, partially assess candidacy, list ways to move from one position to another using various staffing terminology, and evaluate which staffing best applies in a given situation using our glossary. Before we move any further, we do have a couple of polling questions. Your answers are completely anonymous, and these questions are solely to get a feel for what you may already know about the selection process. So you'll see 3 questions listed here. The first one, have you recently participated in an official GC hiring process? Yes, no, what is official? The second one is, do you find the exercise of the Government of Canada jobs hiring process through jobs.gc.ca a necessary evil to ensure fairness and transparency for all candidates? And the third is, have you gotten a role in the Government of Canada without an official multi-step process? We'll give you a moment to put your results in there or your answers in there. All right. So have you recently participated in an official GC hiring process? The most popular answer here with 61% is yes. The second question, do you find the exercise of the hiring process a necessary evil? Okay, this one's a little bit more even. So 40% said yes, and then an even split, 30 and 30 between no and I don't know. And question 3, have you gotten a role without an official multi-step process? 55% of you said no, and the remaining 45% said yes. All right. Great responses. Thank you. Looks like we have an audience with a range of experience here, which our panelists will certainly be able to speak to. So without further ado, let's officially meet our panelists. Let's hand it over to Marissa.
Hello, just want to check that you can hear me well, Julia.
Perfect.
Okay, amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Fortune. I've worked on and off in the public service since 2015. I did 3 student placements through FSWEP at Employment and Social Development Canada and also at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, and then joined Global Affairs when I graduated with my master's degree in international development as a casual, transferred that to a term, and will soon to be indeterminate in my role working on Canada's international assistance envelope. And the past few months, I've been working on a special task force on the future of diplomacy. So that's kind of my career trajectory in the public service.
Thank you. We'll pass it over to Anu. Oh, just one moment. Just bear with us. So perfect. Anu?
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Some technical difficulties in the background. So my name is Anu Shukla-Jones. I am currently a senior advisor at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. I've applied through official competitions over the last many years. The first time I did it was to get into the government. I've done it multiple times to move around in different departments, as well as to enter development programs and in order to receive promotion. So happy to share some insights and experience with you today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. And our third panelist is Allison.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Zawiola. So I started my public service career through an external process. I got my permanent job also at Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada. I started in intellectual property and then moved into workplace well-being. And then a few years later, I competed in an internal process to become a free agent of the Government of Canada. So as a free agent, I have a lot of opportunities to select project-based work that matches my skills and interests. And I find my roles typically through networking, so not competitive processes. I worked at Employment and Social Development Canada and in return to office policies. And now I'm at Treasury Board Secretariat working on career development for employment equity and equity seeking groups. So the policies and unspoken rules of hiring in the Government of Canada can be very confusing, especially because they can vary across departments and agencies. I'm very excited to be here with Anu, Haley, and Marissa to demystify the hiring process and share additional avenues for career mobility outside of the competitive process.
Great. Thanks for those wonderful introductions. We have some varied background and experience, so I'm excited for our conversation today. So let's get started with the basics. What are the different options for work in government? When is an official selection process necessary? Maybe we can start with Allison, since I know that you have an HR background.
Okay, sure. And I'm definitely not the be all and end all in HR. There perhaps maybe some people who also work in HR in our audience today who can also share a lot of information as well. But just for some basics, so there's an assignment versus a secondment, and a lot of people confuse those. An assignment is when you move into a new job within your current department, your home department. A secondment is when you leave your department. So I'm at Treasury Board. If I were to take an assignment within Treasury Board, it'd be an assignment. But if I were to go to, for example, Global Affairs Canada with Marissa, that would be a secondment. There's also micro missions. You may have heard those. Those have become pretty popular. And those are when you're actually still in your current substantive position, but you dedicate a certain portion of your hours to a specific project. And interchange, people may have heard of this one. And this is when you move outside of the federal government. So maybe you work for provincial government, maybe you go to a private industry. And then appointment is commonly used. It's another word for hiring. We say non-advertised appointments or appointments through a competitive process. This is basically another word for hiring. And then indeterminate, maybe we've all heard this one. This is permanently hired versus if you're a term, you have a portion of time and your contract kind of ends after a certain time versus a casual. And casual, not to get too technical, but it's supposed to be less than 90 days per calendar year. So typically more part-time type work or shorter terms. I can also speak a little bit to when an official selection process is necessary, but I'm wondering, maybe I've been talking a lot. Do we want to share with someone else? Would someone else like to chime in?
Marissa, maybe do you want to jump in a little bit, and then
Sure.
Allison can fill in any gaps if there is any.
I am not an HR professional, but from my experience, navigating the federal public service and all its complexity, an official selection process is not always necessary. It's usually the preferable way of doing things because It is supposed to ensure fairness and transparency. Whether or not that's always the case can be up for discussion. But typically when roles are open, they are open through an official selection process. They are advertised and people can apply to them. There are other ways of course, getting jobs through either bridging or having a casual, moving it to a term, et cetera. There's different ways of getting jobs in the federal public service, but typically there are a lot of jobs that are done through these large official selection processes. And that's the way that many people get hired. And one thing that they also do is will create a pool of qualified candidates, which is another way to get a job that you didn't explicitly apply for, but you can use that pool to say, I'm qualified for this level in this position, and then get a job at the same level and position, either elsewhere in the same organization or somewhere else in the public service. Anu or Allison, did I miss anything on that one?
No, I think it's all pretty clear. I'm trying to think of additional ways. I mean, really, it's about, especially if you want to change jobs. I think that is something that's really important to think about when you are applying for positions. And, you know, it is something that you have the opportunity to, because the government of Canada is just massive. There are so many different kinds of jobs, for every kind of specialized, idea of what it is to be happy and successful in a career. There's a job for that somewhere in the government of Canada. It might take some doing to figure it out, but if you don't have the skill sets, you can always find them, and you can always go ahead and look for the different jobs that there are out there. So the additional reason to have that, the additional reason to consider having applying for official competitions is to change your career path. So that's I would urge you to consider that, because once you get in, it's tempting to stay where you are, but there's so much potential that's out there.
So clear and very valuable information, but also a bit complex. And you just kind of spoke to kind of like my next question or maybe more of a statement, but people often say that the selection process is quite complicated. And again, there's a lot of options here. There's different avenues that you can go to achieving a job in the government. So maybe can we just shine some light on this? Like, is it really as complex as people may think?
Yeah, I think I'm supposed to feel that one. So that's a great question. It is complicated. It can be. It really depends on the department. It depends on the role. It depends if someone has somebody in mind for a position. It depends if they're really trying to take a really broad view. There's a lot of there. It can be as complex as you want, as someone designs it to be. But your approach to it is what really matters. And so if you're approaching it from the perspective of you want to change a career or you want to aspire to be something, then it doesn't have to be. I really recommend really thinking about how methodical your approach is. I think that's one of the secrets in government, is when you write your cover letter, when you answer those questions, are you being very clear about what the situation is? Are you being very clear about what the task is that you were assigned to do that fits that question? Are you being very clear about what actions you as an individual took? And are you very clear about what the results are that were obtained from your direct actions? And that kind of method, that kind of really clear approach to answering questions is something that can benefit anybody. It doesn't have to be complicated, but if you approach it from kind of the mindset of what do they need to know about me and what I do, then you can apply to anything. And it's just a matter of whether or not the application is long or if it's a little bit short. But keep in mind that there's so many of you out there that are going to be applying for competitions that, if you're going to take the stress of it being complicated, then it's going to work to your disadvantage. So I really encourage you to be mindful of what your approach is for yourself to take away the complicated stress of it. But happy to hear any advice that you have as well, Allison and Marissa.
One thing I can add, maybe a little bit from the HR perspective, and I don't want to get too technical, but staffing processes and our policies for them are, for the most part, rooted in legislation. So we have our Public Service Employment Act, and this outlines the roles and responsibilities for our hiring managers. And so not all government organizations, certain agencies maybe are not subject to this act, but they typically respect certain principles like nonpartisanship and merit, hiring based on merit. You may have heard that, hiring based on merit, statement of merit criteria. We use that word a lot. So managers, they have a lot of opportunity to decide what they want to do, what works best for their team while balancing meeting business needs, efficiency, and also fairness. And I know that was a question. Is it a necessary evil for fairness? That's a constant debate. So it really comes down to what the hiring manager decides. They have the responsibility to be fair, to be clear, to be transparent, and also look at their needs. And sometimes that can be biased. That's unfortunate because we all are people. But that maybe gives a little bit of a background as to why there seems to be so much paperwork, so many processes, so many steps. I'll hand it off.
Just add to that. Yeah, I think the question itself of why is it so complex really comes down to the fact that the work that we do is so complex, and the work that is done by the federal government is different in every department. And we do a wide range of work, and then try to hire people and manage people through these processes that are supposed to be standardized. And, there's no one size fits all. So everything is a little bit different, and everywhere you go, things are done a little differently. Different processes have different, ways of being run. So it's a complex system for a reason. It's because the work that we do is so heterogeneous and so complex in and of itself. So naturally, the way that we organize ourselves and find positions and match people to places where their skills are going to be the most useful, that's a huge complex machinery of government kind of thing. And learning to navigate it will be the best thing that you can do in your career, even if it's not the most fun.
Can I make just a quick comment about fairness and merit? I think that's what we all want it to be, and it's supposed to be. And because this is an organization that staffs 300,000 people, got to find it. Just to add on to what Allison and Melissa have said, it needs to be kind of standardized. But because there's a recognition that there's over 100 different organizations that are using the same processes, there's going to be some tailoring. So it's meant to be that. Now, we can have a whole 3-day discussion about fairness and merit and what those actually mean. But at the end of the day, this is the system that we have. And so there's navigating it, understanding it, learning about it is really important. If you ever have the opportunity to sit on a board or to be able to participate in the hiring process, you'll really understand a little bit more about why that complexity is there. And that's something that any of you can ask a manager to participate in, so you can really understand the complexity that's in there and what the different kind of requirements are. Sometimes there's an exam, sometimes there's this, sometimes there's that. But getting at what the tools are and why they're there was something that will really benefit you.
Thanks to each of you. I want to kind of circle back to the first question of like the different options for work in government. And one answer that was brought up was the use of pools. So let's say I want to apply to a pool. What's the value in applying that, like seeking work that way? And how much time should I spend on an application? Maybe I'll hand it over to you, Marissa, to start us off.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this isn't just for pools. It's kind of for any job that you would apply for through jobs.gc.ca. There might be, 20 questions. There might be a lot more or less than that you have to answer to prove that you're qualified for the position. And really understanding what they're looking for in the responses that they want you to provide will allow you to succeed at least getting through to a hiring organization, even seeing your application. So the amount of time that you will spend will obviously depend on who you are, how long the application is, but you should really take the time to do the first part well, answer the questions robustly, because they will be looking for reasons to disqualify you, to shrink the pool, and to have a lower number of people to have to assess for the position. So you want to not give them any reasons to kick you out. Spend the time that you need and think of it as practice, because you will do many, hypothetically in the course of a career, types of assessments like this, answering questions about your experience. And if you can save those and create like a personal database of all your answers, all your experiences, that will come in so handy in any other job application that you're going to do, and it will save you a lot of time. So the first couple ones that you do may take a couple hours, may take a couple days, but it'll become muscle memory after that, and you'll be a lot better and quicker at using the answers that you've already created in the past. I would always recommend giving as much detail as you can. They will never disqualify you for giving too much detail, but they will definitely disqualify you for not giving enough detail about your experiences. And be clear, giving specific details about how, where, and when you gained that experience. For example, if they want to know what your experience is with creating briefing documents, you can say from 2018 to 2020, I worked as a policy analyst at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, where I drafted briefing materials for senior management up to, the DG or DM level. So just be as clear as you can and make sure that you don't think of it as, okay, think of it as putting in the work for the rest of your career, not just for this one process, because it will come in handy again and again if you learn how to do it well, if you save your answers, and if you make use of them the next time that a job opportunity comes around for you.
Julia, can I just add to that really quickly?
Of course, yeah.
So everything that Marissa said was really great. From the mindset of the person that's looking at your application, you got to stand out in the 30 seconds that they're going to read your answer. So what information can you put in that's rich enough that when someone's reading this, you stand out and they have 30 seconds to process what you did? So be really clear and deliberate. And if it sounds like you're repetitive in the document, and don't assume that if someone read one question, you can refer to it in another section. Treat each question as an independent answer. And that's really important because sometimes, depending on how the job applications are evaluated, it might be, there's a lot of different ways. So you just want to make sure that your answer has exactly that, and watch your word count. Clarity and being concise is also a skill, and that comes through in what you write.
And I'll just chime in as well. Hopefully we're not extending this question out too long. I think people have all heard of the STAR method, and maybe it's a little bit exhausting to hear about it. But so that's like the situation, the task that you had to do, the action you took, and then the results. And sometimes what I'll see is people will be very good at describing the situation, maybe the tasks that they had to complete and what they did. But then the results kind of drop off. They'll say something like, and then the project was really worked out really well, or then we got some good feedback. So I would also encourage you to not forget that piece when you're responding. And then also just on the subject of pools, again, hopefully this is not too much detail, but typically pools are valid for a year, but they can be extended. And for most people, after a year in the pool, they may have found another position, or those that remain in the pool maybe not be a best fit. It could be experience, skills, language profile as well. But typically once you're placed in a pool, you'll be informed of the expiry date. So if you've applied on GC jobs, it'll let you know. And then in terms of like who can pull you out of a pool, maybe we'll get to this question later, but just in case, I wanted to say that they'll indicate on the job advertisement who can pull you out of a pool. There's a section called intent of process. So maybe it's just available to your department, but sometimes a pool is accessible across departments. So if that's the case, for example, someone from another department can see that you're in this pool and potentially pull you out for staffing. And maybe this, again, this could relate to this whole idea of social media staffing, all those Facebook groups, but you can use the fact that you're in a pool, for example, to prove to hiring managers to sell yourself and make yourself stand out if there's a job that seems like a particularly good fit. And even if they're not able to officially pull you out of the pool, at least you've been partially assessed. So this whole idea of partial assessed candidacy, the fact that you qualified into a pool, you've been assessed for certain competencies. They saw that you went through this whole process. Even though that pool is not accessible, they can use that for justifying hiring you potentially in a non-competitive way. We call those non-advertised processes, non-advertised appointments, excuse me.
Thank you all. Okay, so I'm hearing when it comes to the application, we want to be balanced between being concise, but also almost as detailed and descriptive as possible. I think it was Allison who said, make sure you add that results part, which is something that I didn't even really think of. I think that's a common mistake that people don't do. They explain what the task is, but not kind of the outcome that came from the task that you did. So that's really helpful. And I think Allison, you touched on the pools, how long they're good for, so that you have up to a year for their expired. I also heard about sponsorship. So what is kind of a sponsorship, and how can a sponsor help you find opportunities, job opportunities?
Okay, I can start with this one, but I think that there is a lot of good wisdom amongst Anu and Marissa as well. So I think people are starting to hear the term sponsor more. We're very familiar with mentorship and what it means to be a mentor, but sponsor is this idea of advocacy. So there's this common expression: a mentor talks to you, a sponsor talks about you. And it's really important for you to find a sponsor who is someone who's senior enough and has the power to find you that opportunity. You may have also heard of that term, take me with you, when they bring you into these sort of meetings where you can see how senior level decisions could be made, job shadowing opportunities, that sort of thing. But it's also really important to find a sponsor who has a seat at the table, so to speak, has that ability to find those opportunities for you, and that knows your work. So because it's a level of advocacy, it's almost like one level deeper than mentorship. A mentor can give you advice, talk about their experience, maybe try to inspire you. But a sponsor is almost using a little bit of their goodwill with others, their network, to promote you. And if you can find that person who really believes in you, someone you really connect with, then that can really help support you to go further in your career. I will say, though, it's really important to find that sort of chemistry between the sponsor, because everyone has their own perspective, everyone has their own background. And if someone can say, for example, this is their experience and their perspective of how I would recommend you go about this, I would suggest you do these things. But then you also have to be aware of what makes sense for you and your situation. So
does a sponsorship then lead to more like an unofficial selection process, or an official, or could be both?
Yeah, that can definitely be a possibility, especially if you've demonstrated the merit, so they're familiar with their work, they understand that, and then through their colleagues and networking, they see there's this opportunity. So yes, that does happen. So I'm working on a sponsorship program here at Treasury Board, and we've had a few occasions of that.
Thanks.
So I've received I had two jobs that were because of sponsorship. There were people that knew my reputation, knew my work, knew who I was as a person, and recommended me for jobs. And that was really beneficial. It's not something that I had approached. I think just I think it's, my upbringing, the cultural kind of way of doing things is I don't tend to ask for help. And maybe that's just something that I have to work on myself. But it's they were always people who just knew my work. They had seen it, they were around it, they were impacted by it. And so the reputation that you get after a little while can definitely help with sponsorship. What makes you stand out? Who are you talking to, and how do you present yourself? Are you authentic? Are you contributing? Are you, how are you as a team player? What are the skills and competencies that someone might be looking for in order for you to gain from sponsorship? But I've always had, my sponsorship situations have always been in a non-competitive process, in a non-official capacity.
Yeah, it seems to me, Allison, that you're talking about, developing a more formal sponsorship program at TBS, which is a really interesting concept. But my experience has also been really informal. And, it's not that you would necessarily approach people to say, hey, I need a sponsor to get more, career opportunities. But usually it's someone who knows you and knows that you do good work who would seek to bring your name up in spaces. And that can be hard to find. That can be difficult to find, especially early career. So I think when you're starting out, it's important to have those, medium and long-term goals and objectives conversations with your manager to say, this is where I see myself going. This is what I'm interested in learning. And then that person can begin to see you in that light and begin to make connections for you. If they're able to do that, if there's trainings that come up that they want to recommend you for, or if there's other opportunities, that's, one way that you can begin to gain some momentum in your career is just by having those career conversations with your immediate manager on your team.
So it sounds like it's kind of where these like soft skills like come into play in order to kind of like build a relationship and kind of use sponsorship to grow your career. Okay, that's super interesting. Thank you all for your insight. I think we're now going to move on to our questions from the audience. So remember, you can use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and you can vote for the questions you like by using the thumbs up. So I'm just going to pull up here and we'll just kind of go down the list of those questions that have the most upvotes. So I have one here. Oh, it just took me all the way down. So where can we find tools that can improve our answers for the competition questions and resume development tools? Anybody speak to that? Yeah, Marissa.
Oh, I was going to say I actually don't know, but maybe those who are members of the Federal Youth Network might have an idea on that. I know maybe each department within your individual department, they might have career resources, but I don't know of any federal ones that might help out with those types of things.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I would probably, say, reach out to your manager at a departmental level.
I would also add that there was when you sign up for this, there was something on, it wasn't CSPS. And again, Jen's coming on, but there was something about preparing yourself for a career in the government. And that was like a whole course. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Jen.
There did used to be some CSPS courses, but I don't believe there are any now. And if there are, they would be self-directed. There are also lots of resources in the Federal Youth Network's ecosystem of tools. So if you go back to our wiki page and link back to all of our previous products, we offer learning sessions every single week, and they're always on different topics that apply to new and young public servants. And most of it is around career development. And we also keep all of the repository of past career boot camps. So last year we did a couple sessions on that, and the year before as well. So if you go back through our repository, you will find things about the interview process and STAR and the application process and all of those things in the Federal Youth Network's repository.
Thanks so much, Jen. I have a question here that says, I find the competition process frustrating because many of the posters are only created so that the office can hire someone they already have and it's tailored to them. How can we avoid those processes that waste our time, or are they not a waste of time? And I think I'm going to link that to kind of another question that says like, what advice would you give when it comes to the selection process, and is it valuable, or what has been valuable in your experience? Does anybody want to start with that one, Anu?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I don't think it's ever a waste of time. You're practicing talking about yourself, or writing about yourself. You're practicing and thinking about your skills and experience. You're updating your repository of answers. It might seem that they have someone in mind, but people make decisions, and people can turn those positions down, and you just don't know about what's happening on the other end. Or they might be very focused on this particular skill set that they truly do need. The advice that I've often given to people is, if you are aiming to get into a certain kind of position, look at what their requirements are, or what an equivalent requirement is, and get that experience where you are so that it's not frustrating when you apply. You have that experience of project management. So my background is policy. So all of my policy work is policy stuff. Project management experience, or developing frameworks, or writing briefing materials, whatever it is. If you don't have that, like, it's good to know what there is. If it's frustrating when you're applying, it might be a position that you don't have the skill set for, and it tells you what you can then ask for in your current position. And I'm sorry, do you remind me what the second question is? You said you linked it to the second one.
Yeah, just general, what advice would you give when it comes to the selection process, and what has been valuable in your experience?
I think, like, having that repository that I think Marissa had mentioned is really important. Giving yourself more time than needed. This is your career. So, it is what you invest into it. So don't take it lightly. Take it like if this is your job, then this would be great. Pools are never a waste of time. As has been mentioned, you can tell another hiring manager that you're in a pool. You can be picked out of it. There's, while you have the time and you have the ability to focus on your career, depending on what life stage you're at, you can invest in it. And if you think of it as an investment, it really depends on your mindset when you approach it. It's very frustrating moving up. But it doesn't have to be discouraging. It really depends on how you're approaching it and what you feel you're getting out of it. Because even if you get to an interview stage, or even if you get to write a test, you're seeing how people are conducting themselves in different departments, and you get to decide. You get to decide what your options are. Why would you rule yourself out of something when you can just keep the doors open so that you're never stuck and you always have some place to go when you feel like you're ready to jump?
Yeah, I would add to that. I think the best way to make it not feel like you're wasting your time is to think of everything as practice. And I've gone through selection processes for jobs I didn't even intend to take or want, just because I wanted the practice. I wanted the experience of going through the process, knowing what to expect, and being able to better anticipate it and do it better on the next time around. When it comes to whether or not you're actually going to get a job out of a process, it's important to look at the number of positions they're hiring for. If they're only hiring for one position and they're not creating a pool out of that selection process, maybe it might not be worth your time. If they're hiring 20 positions and creating a pool, that might be a good place to spend some time and energy, because if you're not hired as one of those 20 positions, then you'll be in a qualified pool or a partially qualified pool, and that could help you get a job somewhere else. So there's a couple things to look at to make sure you're not, wasting your time. But I think you definitely have to be patient with these processes and go into them with the mindset of, this is in the long run a benefit to my career, and building that muscle of being able to navigate the complexity and the system that is, the HR system in the public service.
And I wanted to just add just to something small, because Anu and Marissa have already said really great things. In the process, you always have access to accommodations. So any hiring manager, any person doing any hiring, has an obligation to provide accommodations when they're asked. So if you have, for example, a disability or something that just feels like it's preventing you from doing your best in a process, in an interview, in a test, it's really worth it to try and send that email. There's always a contact email at the very least, and make that advocacy for yourself, ask for that support to kind of bring your best self forward. So that's also some advice I would recommend. Really, they have that line usually everywhere. They're always committed to accommodations, but really take advantage of that if you do feel that you need it.
Can I just add one more thing as
Of
well,
course.
Julia? I really look at the tone of the posting. Some are really creative, some are pretty standard. That gives you a hint of, what kind of environment you might be. That might be one of the indicators. So if you're excited by a job opportunity, like, follow that feeling. If it's something that you look at and you're like, oh, like, this is the level I want, this is the pay scale I want, this is the whatever, but you read the posting and it is overly complicated, or if it's overly onerous, or if it's something that puts you off, I would say listen to some of those feelings. Do the practice, but as much as you can, but maybe just pay attention to how you're feeling about some things. And I think over time, as you do these processes, you start to pick up and start to look at signals in the postings of where you might want to spend your energy or not. As Marissa said, the indicators are really important. How many positions are being hired for? Is there a pool? Accommodation is really important. Mental health is no joke. It is absolutely no joke. There's an accessibility plan that was put in place there for every department. And so it is something that is a lived reality for so many people. So if you need that, take that. It absolutely should not, will not be counted against you. It should not be counted against you by law.
Thank you. Those are all really, really informative answers. I kind of want to stay a little bit in this area, but just gear a little bit away. So when in a temporary or term position that is close to ending, do you have any recommendations on searching for opportunities to continue working while searching for an indeterminate role? And I'm just, again, going to attach, because there's so many like aligned questions here. Is emailing managers for an opportunity a good idea? Like, what would you guys recommend?
I can speak to this. When I was first hired by GAC, I was hired on a casual contract to work on the UN Security Council campaign in 2020, and we lost that campaign, right? So that was kind of, the end of that job for me, and I had to either find a new job or find somewhere else to work. So I did a lot of cold emailing in the department. I reached out to a lot of deputy directors who either I knew were hiring or, heard might be hiring. And, I found my term position through that. So I think it's not always a bad thing to do some cold emails. Always start with, those who are closest to you, those who you have a relationship with, and say, I would really love to stay on in this department or in this role. Do you know of anyone who might be hiring for another casual or another term, or are there opportunities for me to stay along? Just have those conversations. And I think generally those are usually very well received, because people remember what it's like to be starting out and wanting to stay on and looking for opportunities. So that's my advice on that.
That's super helpful. Yeah, I feel like it's networking in a way that will help you. Cold calling, like you said. So that's good. Anything to add, Allison or Anu? No? Okay. I think we had mentioned non-ads. So kind of going back to kind of pools and non-ads, maybe like what is a non-ad for one, for those that don't know, and then like, can I use an expired pool to justify a non-ad? Maybe Allison, could you speak to this one? Maybe? Okay, great.
Sure. So non-ad is just for non-advertised, and appointment is like, I think I mentioned this before, appointment is just another word for hiring. So we have appointments or hiring through competitive processes, or non-advertised, meaning no competitive processes. It's not been an advertised position. You, like, I think I also mentioned before that you can potentially use the fact that you have qualified in a pool to sell yourself and to support a hiring manager in the justification of hiring you. So when a manager wants to do an appointment, a hiring of anything, they need to have like a statement of merit criteria. And typically you'll see this in a job poster, the competencies they're testing for, what's asset versus what is nice to have. But then if they're doing a non-advertised, the hiring manager will just have to write that themselves, as well as like a clear justification as to why they don't need to do a competitive process to hire this person. Each department has slightly different policies on this. So some have more requirements. For example, at Treasury Board Secretariat, it really is up to the hiring manager to do something in good faith. I think that's the actual term they used, in good faith. So they can use the fact that, again, partial assessed candidacy, I think I talked about this before, but they can use the fact that you have qualified, maybe you've done some testing. Typically, like there's like the public service entrance exams. Some of those exams, they don't really expire right away. And once you're in, you don't really have to do the entrance exam again. So they can all use that in part of their justification, and it also takes off less work for them as well. I'm going to hand it off to someone else if they have other stuff to add for that.
I would say, though, you don't need to be in a pool to get a non-ad. You don't need to have, taken any of those tests. You just need to be able to, you need a manager who's willing to put in the work to prove that you're the best person for the job and kind of go to bat for you to appoint you to that position.
Thanks. I think that speaks to actually quite a few questions we had. So I think your answers covered several questions from our audience. Allison, you mentioned testing. So I see something here that's like, I don't test well, so processes holding back from career progression. Like, what advice would you have for people that, feel that could be an impediment for them?
So I can start off, but I would really like to also hear what Anu and Marissa have to say about this. So I did mention about accommodations, like there, again, each department is a little bit different on how they go about the accommodation process. But as Anu mentioned, it is by law, like this is a mandated requirement to accommodate individuals when they have a medical or any sort of other experience that's preventing them from doing their best in a competition. So I would say that's really important. And then also I would say that I understand, because I personally don't find that I test well either. And often, when you're preparing, you have your answers, you feel really confident. And then, I don't know, you get into the interview and maybe the questions are worded slightly different than what you were thinking they would be. Or it's a bit more technical, a technical question that you weren't expecting, and it can just throw you off a little bit. And for me, I think the only thing I did was I practiced a lot. So I don't know exactly what the Federal Youth Network offers, but when I was sort of coming up, they had a lot of like mock interview opportunities. I would also speak with like colleagues or hiring managers to get their support in practice and preparation for that kind of thing. And then I think Anu and Marissa had also mentioned, sometimes maybe you just go through a process just for the practice, just to get that experience under your belt. Because I don't know if the more you do it, you ever get more comfortable with it, because I've done a lot and I'm still not super comfortable, but the more I see it, the more I'm able to kind of change and adjust when I'm getting a little bit of curveballs in the interviews or in some sort of testing experience.
Just to add to that, I think so I don't like tests. I don't think anybody likes tests. So they're stressful. You don't know what's happening. There's all kinds of stuff. I would recommend that you think about like what are the aspects of not testing well? Is it details that you miss? Maybe you need to refresh beforehand. Is it time management? Then you can kind of mentally set some markers for yourself. I think especially for timed tests, ones that are like short, versus ones that give you like a week to do or something, you might want to think about what is it that you need to do for time management. And perfection is the enemy of the good. If you spend too long doing parts of it and not enough time doing others, you want to think about like having a balanced response. They're not looking for, did you get the right answer? Because did you get the same position, policy statement, whatever, as what's going on? It's really about your thinking process and how you do the work and how clear and concise you are. So pay attention to like, what is it that they're testing you for versus what you think you need to do to perform. And sometimes that can look like, are they testing your writing ability? Can you write concisely? Can you make an argument that is contrary to what your personal beliefs are? Something might be in the news. It doesn't mean that you need to like know the policy issues to get into it. They're not testing you on your knowledge in that section, unless they're testing you on your knowledge. But really be clear about what it is that they're testing you on, so that you can focus on what those things are. And usually they'll say this, this exam is to test for X, Y, or Z. When it comes to things like developing, let's say, like a PowerPoint presentation, you got to do that in a very short period of time, or a briefing note in a very short period of time. Again, think about completing each of those sections to the, as a good enough, not perfect, but good enough, because you want to be able to pass that section instead of necessarily showing off all of your skills, which you may not have time for. So I really encourage you to think about what it is about the testing process And is it something about the process, or is it about something that you need to pay attention to in your behavior and your mindsets?
I think that's super helpful. There was kind of some questions about, what if other candidates meet the exact same criteria? How are candidates differentiated, and what can I kind of focus on to make myself stand out? I think you all kind of spoke to each part of those questions, but is there any, if you had one thing to say of how to make yourself stand out, what would you say? That's it's a bit tough one, but differentiating yourself from those that if you have the exact same on paper, kind of you meet the same criteria.
So have a question. That's what I would say. What differentiates you from others? I think having a question that is thoughtful, that might represent kind of more of who you are. What I've asked, so I was in a development program, and I had to interview for different positions. And so what I did was, in order for me to interview that hiring manager, because keep in mind, this is a relationship that you're going to have. It's not just about you winning that competition. It's about, do you want to work for that person? Do you want to work in that organization? Do you want to work in that unit? Because there's cultures everywhere. There's microcultures everywhere. So you want to make sure that that fits you. So I would ask the hiring managers, I think, through this process, and granted, I was protected in this, but I said, what is your superpower? Or what is it that you really, really enjoy, and what drives you in your work? The answers that you get to questions like that, in order to get to understand who your hiring manager is, will tell you a lot about how bad you want to be in that position. And I think you have to remember that you have power in this too. Across the government of Canada, there are tons of positions, and there's a lot of demand for youth. A lot of demand for people who are younger and earlier in the careers, that can be that have fresh energy, that have great insights, that have enthusiasm. And so you're in demand. And if you can remember that you are in demand and you walk in there with that kind of power, then hopefully you will find something that is a good fit. Sometimes it takes time, so you have to be okay with that. But when you get a good fit, it's fantastic. And so I do wish that for all of you. But have a question. It's not about how you stand out, but maybe it's about how you need them to stand out, so that you can be sure that that's where you want to be.
That's great. I totally agree with everything that Annie said. And I would add that, and I think it's similar to what she said, but passion is what makes candidates stand out. I think if you find something that you're passionate about and that you love to do, that'll be above and beyond, just the typical resume that comes across a hiring manager's desk. They can really tell that you're passionate about the work and that you will give everything that you have to it. I think that'll make you stand out from the status quo.
And just to add on, because I agree with both what both my colleagues have said, is also the interview. You are trying to demonstrate your competencies or respond to the questions as thoroughly and also concisely as possible. But I would say the interview is also where hiring managers get to know you and get a sense of who you are as an individual. And if you are really passionate and excited about this work, then being able to sort of communicate it in a way beyond just written can really make it come to life and help you stand out, just because now we're having a conversation, it's an interaction with people. And I know sometimes that one-on-one interaction or interviewing with a panel can be intimidating. And sometimes we sort of hide a little bit of ourselves because that is just a very intimidating process in itself. But when you're able to sort of just allow a little bit of who you are to come through in your responses, I find I really resonate with that. And I think hiring managers resonate with that.
Great advice. Thank you all. Just looking through our questions, maybe we have time for one or two more. Going back to kind of the pools, we have lots of questions about pools. But how does being in a pool differ from being in an inventory? I think that's a really good question. Allison's ready. Yeah, go for it.
I was actually, someone just asked me this question recently, so fresh in my mind. So a pool, typically a pool is created from like a process where the candidacy has been assessed. So it could be a partially assessed candidacy pool. So they've been tested for certain competencies, and then they're in the pool for that. An inventory typically is sort of at level. So you typically just kind of identify that you're at level, and it's like an at level kind of collection of resumes of individuals. And then a hiring manager, if they see that inventory, it's really, the onus is completely on them to determine merit, to assess for competencies, and to do everything there. I will caveat that, though, is that some inventories do have a little bit of screening involved. So there is a little bit of testing, or there is some interviews. Like at TBS, we just had one. So it's really important to read the job advertisement for those nuances. So if it's an inventory, confirm if you're going to be assessed to a certain level, or if it is just like an at-level inventory, and then it's just kind of like a collection of resumes in that sense. Or if it's a pool, how much will it be assessed for? Who will be able to pull you out of that pool? So I would say really read the job poster very clearly.
That's super helpful. So I think in my experience, I've experienced with inventories, but not pools. And I was like, what is the difference between them? So I'm glad that was a question asked. Thank you. We are near the end. Is there any kind of final advice that any of our panelists want to give? I think you've provided a lot of great advice today and touched on a lot of areas related to kind of more official and unofficial selection processes. But any final thoughts?
My only advice is don't take anything personally. These processes are huge and impersonal and oftentimes baffling and confusing, overwhelming maybe, and sometimes nonsensical, honestly. So I would just don't take anything too personally. Have your passion, have your persistence, and you'll be fine.
I like that. Any other last thoughts?
I can add something. I would say that going back to the original question, when is a competitive process necessary? And I think like Marissa and maybe Anu has also already said it really depends on what you're looking for out of your career. And I think it really comes down to reflection on what your strengths are, your areas of development are, to give yourself a sense of direction on what you're trying to move towards, and then provide you with goals and areas that you can develop, as well as what could be a deal breaker for you. So for example, like as a free agent, I have a lot of mobility and opportunities, but I have to be really comfortable with ambiguity and flexibility. And for some, that's a deal breaker, but for me, I think it's worth it for what I'm gaining for it. So getting to know exactly what works for you, what your limits are, will really give you a sense of direction and where you need to go. Yes, and also competitive processes are not the be all and end all. I know it's sort of like some people say necessary evil. It's the nature of the system at this time. But as everyone has shared, there are other ways of moving around in the government without going through that formal processes. So putting yourself out there and networking a bit is really important. And networking in the sense of seeing who can help you, but also who you can help. So it's like a collective sort of supporting of one another and making meaningful connections with people who have similar interests to yours, but also with different perspectives. So you have a broader understanding of the public service, of different backgrounds, of different perspectives.
And I guess the piece of advice that I would have is if you didn't get in, like you may have dodged a bullet. There's places that have a lot of high turnover. There's places that are toxic. There's people that are toxic. So you may have dodged a bullet. So keep that in mind. It is, if you put all your eggs in one basket, you're really limiting yourself. So my advice to you would be to don't limit your opportunities. Apply to everything. And if there's something that kind of, partially piques your interest, think about going with it, because every job that you have will make you more well-rounded. So really think about learning. Everything, everything adds up. Whenever I talk to individuals about their career trajectories, their like what their histories are like, I'm always amazed that everyone has a unique combination, and that makes for a really, really rich experience in the public service. If you're really, really heads down, driven, blinders on, you might miss opportunities. So I would say try and think about being a T-shaped public servant where you've got a lot of experience, you've got some depth in some places, but you really have an understanding about how the system works. That means different departments, that means different units within an organization, that means different roles and responsibilities on particular files. Really try and understand how the system works, because to be a good public servant, we do really complex work, as my colleagues have mentioned. And so it's to the benefit of the people that we serve, the people that we represent as public servants in this organization. Like, don't lose sight of that and really think about like what it is that you need to do a good job on behalf of people who live across this country.
Thanks so much. You are all a wealth of knowledge. I know I learned a lot today, and I'll definitely look at this recording when I start kind of looking into a little bit more of the official selection process. A big thank you to our audience for your participation. If you want to know more about any of these topics, check out CBC 2023 Wiki resource page, and I'll hand it over to Jen for one final poll. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Like you, I am going to have to watch the recording because I was so busy looking at the questions and working on the session. It was hard to absorb all that information, but I know there was a wealth of it because the audience was very engaged. So thanks to the audience. We do have one final polling question for you. The results of this poll will not be shared. It's for our internal use. But what we'd like to know is, was this session a good use of your time? Hopefully so, because there were so many questions going on. So yes, no, or I don't know. That just helps us to know if we were on track with offering this session to you. Thanks so much for joining us today. In addition to this session, we will be discussing later this afternoon at 2:30 employee-driven career development. That one is sure to be full of passionate speakers, so I'm interested to hear how that's going to go. There's also an opportunity to network with other GC employees, which will take place in WonderMe from 4 until 5. The links for all of these sessions can be found on the agenda back in the V-Expo. All the resources mentioned today, so if you weren't able to copy the links, don't worry. All the resources are going to be put onto our wiki page, as will the link to the recording, which will be on our YouTube channel. All of that will be available for you in the next 24 hours. So hopefully you enjoyed this session as much as we did. We look forward to seeing you at other career bootcamp sessions. Thanks to our panelists and our moderator, and we'll see you later.